At 17,000 feet over the Atlantic, this was supposed to be a quick training intercept. 3 U.S. fighters, an F-15EX Eagle II, an F-16V Viper, and an F/A-18E Super Hornet, closed in on what looked like an easy target, a cheap RAF jet, a Hawk T2, no stealth, no crazy speed, no heavy weapons, just one small British aircraft staring at 3 modern monsters on the scope. But then the Hawk didn't run. It slowed down, turned into the merge, and in seconds the hunters realized the truth. They weren't chasing a target. They were entering a trap. At 17,000 feet over the Atlantic, the sky looked calm enough to fool anyone who wasn't watching the radar. This was meant to be a controlled NATO training intercept. No politics, no headlines, just professional pilots running a scenario that had been rehearsed 1,000 times. 3 U.S. jets close in, pressure the target, force it to comply, end the run clean. And on paper, the target was almost insulting. An RAF Hawk T2, a trainer jet, a cheap aircraft. The kind of plane people joked about when they wanted to sound confident. No stealth shaping, no long-range missiles, no brute thrust, just a small British jet built to teach pilots how to fly fighters before they touch the real monsters. Against that, the U.S. formation looked like overkill. High right was a USAF F-15EX Eagle II, holding altitude advantage like it owned the sky. The Eagle wasn't subtle. It didn't need to be. It was power, radar reach, and dominance, built to control the fight before the merge even happened. Low left was a U.S. Navy F/A-18E Super Hornet, smooth and patient, sliding into position like a blade that didn't need speed to be dangerous. It was the kind of jet that won by timing, not by noise. And behind them, closing fast, was the third contact, an F-16V Viper, light, aggressive, and eager. The Viper didn't stalk. It hunted. It wanted the merge. And wanted the turn fight, wanted the moment where skill mattered more than hardware. 3 jets, 3 styles, 1 target. The Hawk pilot saw them all on the scope. He didn't need the radio to tell him what was happening. The geometry was obvious. The F-15EX would squeeze from above, forcing a predictable line. The Super Hornet would drift wide and close the rear quarter. The F-16 would pressure the merge and punish any mistake. The trap was textbook. Most pilots in a Hawk would do the safe thing. Extend away, keep it simple, stay out of the mess. Because a Hawk wasn't built to fight 3 front-line fighters. It was built to learn. But the RAF pilot didn't react like a student. He reacted like someone who understood the only way to survive a 3-ship intercept. Break the script. He didn't accelerate. He didn't climb. He did something that made no sense to anyone watching from a comfortable screen. He eased the throttle back. Just slightly. Not enough to stall. Not enough to look reckless. Just enough to change the closure rate and force the Americans to commit earlier than they wanted. The F-15EX corrected immediately, staying high, staying dominant. The Super Hornet adjusted too, keeping the wide line. The F-16 tightened its approach, sensing opportunity. But that tiny reduction in speed did one dangerous thing. It pulled all 3 U.S. jets closer together, compressed their spacing, reduced their room to work. And in air combat, when the sky gets small, technology matters less than angles. At 12 miles, the Hawk stayed steady, wings level, calm like it didn't even care. At 10, the F-16 began drifting into the forward quarter, ready to pounce. At 8, the Super Hornet's line started to cut in. At 6, the F-15EX began to lower its nose, preparing to own the merge. Everything was happening exactly the way the U.S. formation expected until the Hawk pilot made the second move. He rolled toward them. Not away. Toward a trainer jet turning into 3 fighters. It was either the dumbest decision in the sky or the smartest trap anyone had seen all year. And as the range collapsed toward the merge, one truth became clear. The Hawk wasn't trying to escape. It was trying to choose where the fight would happen. Because if the Hawk could force the merge on its terms, the U.S. jets wouldn't be hunting a weak target anymore. They'd be trying not to collide with each other, while the cheap jet slipped into the only space they forgot to protect. The merge came fast. Not the cinematic kind where aircraft circle each other with room to breathe. This was the ugly, compressed version. 3 U.S. jets closing from different angles, all expecting the Hawk to break first, to run, to give them the clean win. But the Hawk didn't break. It invited the chaos. At 4 miles, the F-15EX Eagle II held high and slightly forward, confident it could dominate the fight from above. The F-A-18E Super Hornet stayed lower and wider, ready to slide into the Hawk's rear quarter the moment the British pilot turned too hard. The F-16V Viper pushed in aggressively, hungry for the first kill call. The RAF Hawk pilot saw the trap tightening and made a decision that looked suicidal. He pulled up. Not a full vertical climb, just a sharp pop that forced all 3 American pilots to react at the same time. The Hawk's nose rose, the horizon dropped, and for a split second the British jet became the center of a 3-way collision problem. The F-16V reacted instantly, pitching up to follow, because that's what the Viper does. It commits. The F-15EX corrected with pure power, staying above and ready to slice down. The Super Hornet stayed lower for half a heartbeat, waiting to punish the Hawk when it bled speed. That half heartbeat was everything. Because the Hawk pilot wasn't trying to climb away. He was trying to force separation inside the enemy formation. At the top of the pop-up, the Hawk rolled hard left and dumped speed deliberately, dirty, aggressive, almost disrespectful. The jet shuddered as it bit into the turn, staying controllable only because the Hawk was built to handle training abuse. The F-16V overshot first. Not because the Viper pilot was bad, because he was fast and committed. He crossed the Hawk's forward arc too quickly, nose drifting wide as he tried to pull back in. The Viper's energy carried him through the picture like a bullet that couldn't stop. The Hawk pilot didn't chase the Viper. He ignored it. Because chasing was what fast jets wanted you to do. Chasing made you predictable. Chasing made you slow. Instead, the Hawk went for the one jet that was supposed to be the safest. The Super Hornet. The Hornet had been patient, wide, calculated. It expected the Hawk to be busy surviving the F-16's pressure. It expected the Hawk to be forced into a defensive turn that would expose its tail. But the Hawk didn't turn defensively. It turned offensively, straight into the Hornet's line. For a moment, the Super Hornet pilot saw the Hawk's nose swing toward him and felt something he didn't expect to feel against a trainer jet. Pressure. He broke hard, trying to deny the angle. The Hornet rolled and pulled, confident in its low-speed handling, expecting the Hawk to stall out or lose control. The Hawk didn't. It stayed tight. It stayed smooth. It stayed inside. A clean tone hit in the Hawk cockpit. Simulated lock parameters lining up. Not a guaranteed kill, but enough to make a point. Enough to force the Hornet to respect the shot. Simulated Fox 2, the RAF pilot called, calm like he was reading a routine check. In the exercise, that meant the Hornet was dead. And in that second, the entire U.S. formation's plan collapsed. Because the fight was supposed to go one way, 3 fighters, controlling 1 trainer. Instead, the trainer had just removed one of the fighters from the equation. Now it was 2. The F-15EX dropped its nose hard, coming down from above like a hammer. It wasn't going to let a Hawk embarrass the formation. The Eagle's turn was aggressive, heavy, fast, pure power forcing the geometry back into American control. The Hawk pilot saw the shadow fall over him. He didn't run. He didn't climb. He did the one thing that made the F-15EX pilot's blood run cold. He slowed again, just enough to make the Eagle's closure rate explode, just enough to invite the overshoot. The F-15X pilot tried to correct, pulled harder, tightened the arc, forced the nose down. But at this range, with this closure, you don't fix geometry. You survive it. And as the Eagle flashed through the Hawk's forward quarter, the RAF pilot rolled perfectly into the gap it left behind, slipping into the only safe space in the sky. The space where a cheap jet could become a predator. The U.S. pilots had entered the merge expecting a quick intercept. Now they were fighting for something else entirely. Control. And the Hawk was taking it away 1 second at a time. For the first time, the Americans weren't running a drill. They were reacting to a problem. The F-A-18E Super Hornet had already been killed in the simulation, forced out of the fight by a jet that wasn't supposed to win anything at all. The F-16V Viper was wide after the overshoot, trying to rebuild the picture, and the F-15EX Eagle II was now low, fast, and angry, trying to end this before it turned into a humiliation. But the Hawk pilot wasn't chasing pride. He was chasing angles. He knew he couldn't outrun them, he couldn't outclimb them, he couldn't outpower them, so he did the only thing that could work against 3 advanced fighters: he made them fight each other's timing. The F-16V came back in first, turning hard to regain the Hawk's rear quarter. The Viper was light and fast, and now it had space to work. It wanted the clean shot, the moment where skill and turn rate would finally bury the trainer jet. The Hawk pilot let the Viper come. He didn't panic, he didn't flinch. He kept the jet in a tight, controlled turn, never bleeding too much energy, never giving the Viper a stable tracking solution. The Hawk was smaller, slower, and surprisingly hard to read at close range. Every time the Viper tried to settle the nose, the Hawk shifted just enough to break the line. The Viper pilot pushed harder. That's when the Hawk snapped into the vertical. A short climb, then a roll, then a drop back down, forcing the Viper to follow into a maneuver that looked simple but was designed to do one thing: steal the Viper's closure. The F-16 overshot again, not by meters, by a moment. And that moment was fatal. The Hawk rolled into the Viper's path, nose swinging through the forward arc like it was guided. The HUD locked briefly, clean enough to count. "Simulated Fox 2, the RAF pilot said. Now the Viper was dead too. 2 down. The radio stayed quiet for a second. Not because the Americans were stunned, because they were calculating. Because the only jet left now was the F-15EX, and it wasn't going to allow a third. The Eagle II climbed back up to regain altitude advantage, using raw power to reset the fight the way it was meant to be fought, above the mess, above the turning chaos, above the cheap tricks. But the Hawk pilot didn't chase the Eagle upward. He stayed low, stayed patient, stayed disciplined, because he knew something the F-15EX pilot didn't want to admit. A high-energy fighter hates fighting something slow when the slow thing refuses to die. The Eagle dropped again, trying to force the Hawk into a defensive break. If the Hawk turned too hard, it would bleed speed and become helpless. If it didn't turn, it would be killed instantly. The Hawk did neither. It turned late, just late enough to deny the shot, just early enough to keep control. The F-15EX crossed close, fast, and heavy, like a freight train trying to turn into a knife fight. The Eagle's power made it dangerous, but also made it hard to slow down without losing the advantage it relied on. The Hawk pilot saw the opening and did something brutal. He cut inside, not chasing the tail, cutting into the space the Eagle had to occupy next. It was a move that looked impossible on paper, a trainer jet stepping into the path of a frontline air dominance fighter. But the Hawk wasn't trying to win a chase, it was trying to win a moment. The Eagle pilot corrected hard, pulling G to keep the nose on. The Hawk tightened even more, smaller radius, tighter circle. The distance shrank until it became uncomfortable. Then the Hawk's nose stabilized. For half a second, the lock tone returned. Clean, centered, unforgiving. Simulated guns, the RAF pilot said. That call hit like a slap. In a real fight, it would have meant the Hawk had a gun solution inside lethal range. In training terms, it meant the Eagle had been caught. A cheap jet had just hunted the last U.S. fighter. The sky went quiet again. Not because anyone was confused, because everyone understood what had just happened. 3 modern American jets had entered the intercept expecting control, and a British trainer had turned the fight into a trap by doing the one thing none of them prepared for, refusing to play their game. The Americans had the technology. The Hawk had the timing. And timing is what turns a target into a hunter. Even when the jet is cheap. Knock it off. The call came clean and calm, but it landed heavy, like a door shutting on a fight that had gotten too real for comfort. Instantly, the sky changed. The Hawk rolled wings level and eased off the pressure. The F-15EX Eagle II climbed away to regain separation. The F-16V Viper widened out and steadied. The FA-18E Super Hornet rejoined from distance, still flying but already dead in the exercise timely. All 4 aircraft returned to professional spacing like nothing dramatic had happened. But everyone knew it had, because the data didn't lie. In the debrief, the first replay was silent, just tracks and vectors on a screen, 4 icons moving through the same patch of sky, compressing, merging, and separating again. Then the instructor paused the footage right at the first turning point, the moment the Hawk slowed down. That tiny choice, so small it almost looked like nothing, had forced the entire U.S. formation to collapse inward. It pulled 3 advanced fighters into the same fight at the same time, stripping away their biggest advantage, space. And once space disappeared, the Hawk didn't need stealth or speed. It needed mistakes. Not big mistakes. Not rookie errors. Just human ones. The F-16's first overshoot wasn't because the Viper pilot was weak. It was because he was aggressive and committed. The Hornet's death wasn't because it was slow. It was because it expected the Hawk to behave like a target, not like a fighter. And the F-15X's final trap wasn't because the Eagle lacked power. It was because power doesn't matter when you can't slow down fast enough to keep the angle. The Hawk pilot didn't win by breaking physics. He won by weaponizing them. Low speed forced overshoots. Tight turns denied stable locks. Vertical pops broke timing. Patience forced frustration. The Americans weren't shocked because a Hawk was magical. They were shocked because the Hawk pilot fought like a predator inside a jet everyone labeled harmless. In the briefing room, one U.S. pilot finally said the sentence everyone was thinking. "We treated it like a trainer." That was the mistake. Because the Hawk wasn't just a trainer. It was a fighter-shaped aircraft flown by a fighter-trained mind. And when a pilot understands geometry, the aircraft becomes less important than the decision-making inside it. The instructor rewound again, this time slower. "Watch this," he said. The screen showed the exact moment the Hawk rolled into the Hornet's line instead of away from it. The moment it refused to extend. The moment it forced the merge. The moment it took the fight into a space where 3 jets couldn't coordinate cleanly without risking each other. A 3 versus 1 intercept is supposed to be controlled, but control depends on predictability, and the Hawk had refused to be predictable. Outside, the ocean stayed calm. The sky stayed wide. The jets landed safely, crews walked away, and the exercise ended the way exercises always end, with professionalism and quiet respect. But one thing had changed, not on paper, in mindset. Because every pilot in that debrief learned the same uncomfortable lesson. A cheap jet isn't weak. A cheap jet is dangerous when it forces you to fight in the wrong way, and the next time those U.S. jets saw a small RAF aircraft on their scope, they wouldn't call it easy. They'd call it what it had proven itself to be. A threat. Not because of what it was, because of what it could do when the merge got tight, and the hunters became the hunted.